Well, it's currently about 3 o'clock in the morning Central Standard Time, which means we are about 8 hours away from the college football playoff reveal. We had a lot of things become clear today after we crowned all four power conference champions. We had Arizona State dominating the Big 12 title game, beating Iowa State 45-19. Georgia defeats Texas in overtime 19-16, despite losing Carson Beck, which I'll talk about. We had AC in the ACC. Clemson walks it off against SMU 34-31 with a 55-yard field goal as time expired, and Oregon wins a shootout against Penn State 45-37. So let's talk about the bracket and predict kind of where we think this is going to go here. And it's pretty simple. I think all the spots are accounted for with the exception of one. And we all knew coming into this weekend, it was going to come down to essentially how the ACC title played out and Alabama sitting there for that final spot. And so I think most people, including myself, thought that the committee more than likely was going to find a way to put Alabama in. If SMU won, then Alabama would get that final spot because Clemson obviously wouldn't get in at large. However, if SMU lost, a lot of people thought Alabama would take that final spot. And I thought the committee would probably do it. We saw what happened with Florida State last year, right? Where they were 13-0. It was unprecedented that you leave an undefeated conference champion out of the playoff, and they did it. But they did it because that was the last year of the 4-team playoff, and there was no precedent being set because that playoff ceased to exist, and they could make their own rules that year. If they were to do that this year, they would set a dangerous precedent going forward. Still, I thought going into this weekend, there was a decent chance if Clemson won that game, specifically if they won it by a lot, that they would still put Alabama in. After the way the game played out, I just don't see how you could possibly leave SMU out. SMU did not play their best football game, and yet they were the better team in that game against Clemson for 3 quarters. They just didn't play good early. You can say what you want about officiating. I'm not an SMU fan. There was not a single penalty called on Clemson the entire football game. I believe they said it was the first time that's happened in over 70 years for a Clemson football team. It was the most lopsided called game early, and it wasn't just the fact that there was only like 7 penalties called on SMU. But the first touchdown of the game for Clemson was there were 2 linemen illegally downfield by 10 yards, and it wasn't called. The touchdown stood. There was a picked up offensive pass interference on Clemson that they threw that ended up in points. I believe a touchdown for Clemson. So, still with all that, SMU trailed by 17 in the fourth quarter, came back and tied the game. And if it weren't for a crazy return and a incredible kick, SMU would have won that game. But babbling on here, point being, if you watch that game and you have eyes and you've watched college football, you cannot possibly believe, unless you're an Alabama fan, that SMU team doesn't deserve to be in the playoff. They had one loss going in. They lost in their conference championship game by 3. And the other game they lost was to a top 20 BYU game by 3 as well earlier in the season. And by the way, they didn't have Kevin Jennings starting at quarterback, who is their current starting quarterback. That's a different discussion. When you look purely at the resumes, though, you still have trouble understanding how they could put Bama in here, right? Bama, 3 losses, SMU, 2 losses. Now, you look at what are the losses. Well, like we said for SMU, they have 1 loss against BYU where their current quarterback was not the starter. It was a 3-point loss early in the season, I believe, second game of the season. That BYU team finished 10-2. They then lost today to a 10-3 Clemson Tigers team who won the ACC, obviously. Those are their 2 losses. Alabama's losses, 3 of them. Tennessee, who was 10-2, and then Vandy and Oklahoma, who were both 6-6. Okay? Oklahoma was the worst loss of anybody in the college football playoff race, with the exception of Notre Dame's early season loss to Northern Illinois. It was the worst loss, in my opinion, of any team in the college football race. Oklahoma was outgained in every single SEC game they played, with the exception of the game against Alabama, where they outgained the Tide by over 100 yards. Oklahoma's lone win was against Auburn, a game they trailed by double digits in the fourth quarter, and Auburn had the ball and a 5-point lead with 4 minutes to go and threw a 67-yard interception return for touchdown to lose the game. Okay, so there's a higher than 80% chance that Auburn should have won that game and that Oklahoma came into that game against Alabama with 0 SEC wins. Okay, they're a bottom 4 SEC team. They're in the same category as Kentucky and Mississippi State. You know, they're horrific. It was a horrible loss. And it wasn't just a loss; it was a domination, 24-3. Jalen Milroe threw 3 interceptions, completed less than 50% of his passes for only 168 yards. Okay, it was embarrassing. It was an embarrassing loss, and they don't deserve to be in the playoff because of that loss, especially when the way SMU played today. Alabama is the only team in the top 20 and the only team of the potential college football playoff teams to have 2 losses to teams with 500 or worse records. There are only 3 other teams that have 1 loss. Alabama has 2. Okay? That's crazy. And the only team in the top 25 that has 2 other than Alabama is Colorado. All right? So this is a team that does not deserve to be in the college football playoff. They had their shots. They lost games to bad teams. They have no one to blame but themselves, right? Just like Miami has no one to blame but themselves being up 21-0 and losing to Syracuse the other day, right? They don't deserve to be in either, but SMU does. So let's take a look real quick at the seedings and we'll kind of go through this. So I think, in my opinion, the seeds are pretty much set for the 1 through 4. Oregon is obviously going to be the 1. They're the only undefeated Power 4 team. Georgia is the 2 after defeating Texas, and I'm going to get into them in a second, but they are almost certainly the 2. That means Boise State, and I think this is a flaw in the system that Boise State gets a bye, but they do. And they earn their way into this playoff for sure. I just don't know they deserve to get a bye. They're going to be the 3, and more than likely Arizona State will be the 4. I think that's almost 100%. I would be shocked if Clemson jumped Arizona State or Boise State. Those would be the only possibilities. But considering Boise and Arizona State dominated their conference title games and were ranked ahead of Clemson going into this, and the fact that Boise has 1 loss and Arizona State has 2, and Clemson has 3 losses, I just would be shocked. I think Clemson will be the 12 seed. You have some people making an argument that they're going to be the 11, but I think we're splitting hairs here. I think the point of the matter is the top 4 seeds are pretty much set. Those are likely going to be the buys. So that leaves the next question, which is how do these seedings or these teams shake out in terms of seeding beyond the top 4 seeds? And it's really interesting because it's the same question that we're looking at when you talk about SMU versus Alabama. Do you penalize a team for losing in a conference championship, right? Because you look at Texas and Penn State. Both of those teams got to a title game in the 2 best conferences in the country, and both of them lost close, hard-fought games to top 2 teams, right? Number 1 Oregon and number 2 Georgia, which is how the seedings are going to shake out, are those losses, right? Texas lost in overtime to number 2 Georgia, and Penn State lost by 8, a 1-possession game to number 1 Oregon. Texas's game was closer if you watch the 2. Texas, had a chance at the end to win the game. It goes to overtime, could have gone either way. But then you also have the argument, well, Carson Beck didn't play in the second half because he was injured. And then you go back, but it's like, well, Texas was leading at halftime when Carson Beck was in the game. They played better with their backup in. So it's kind of like, I think you kind of have to wash that and just say, okay, they lost a close game to a top 2 team in the SEC title game. They should not be penalized. Similarly, Penn State, they were getting beat for a lot of this game. At one point, they trailed by 18, but they fought back, and they had multiple chances with the ball to tie or take the lead, couldn't do it. And so because of that, they lost the game by 8. But to me, they shouldn't be penalized either. And going into this week, we had Texas and then Penn State, right? Texas was 2, Penn State was 3. Neither of them will get a bye. So because of that, I believe Texas should drop to 5 and Penn State should drop to 6. All right. I don't see how you could possibly jump. I don't think Penn State could jump Texas. Texas was ranked ahead of Penn State heading into this week. I saw somebody on CBS had Penn State at the 5, Texas at the 6. You could do that. I don't see how you could justify it. Penn State has no good wins all season. At least Texas went into College Station and beat A&M. I don't think Texas has played a tough schedule either. and I'm a Texas fan, but they haven't. They haven't played very good teams. And they shouldn't have lost to Georgia. Regardless, I think, to me, you cannot benefit Notre Dame, Ohio State, Indiana, Tennessee, right? All those teams for not playing in a conference title game, for getting to sit home and not play because either they are not in a conference like Notre Dame or they didn't earn their way into a conference title game. You should not be the beneficiary of teams losing in a conference title game when you're sitting on your ass at home, right? Especially for me, Notre Dame, because Notre Dame chooses to not be in a conference. They played the easiest schedule in the country. They didn't beat a soul, and they lost to Northern Illinois. Now, I think Notre Dame's a good football team, and they deserve to be in the playoff based on who's the best football teams, and you're not going to leave an 11-1 Notre Dame team out. But if you change their name, right, if you change their name to Tulane and they weren't in a conference, would we be saying they're a lock here? Maybe, maybe not. But my point being, Notre Dame should not jump Texas or Penn State. It just shouldn't happen. And in reality, all those seeds should kind of remain the same. So my belief is that the committee's going to do the right thing. Not that they've shown a propensity to do so, but I'm going to say Texas 5, Penn State 6, Notre Dame at the 7. And keep in mind, I'm talking seeding here, okay? Because the rankings are going to be different because Boise State and Arizona State will not be ranked ahead of any of those teams, but they will be seeded ahead of them. But again, I'll repeat that. Texas 5, Penn State 6, Notre Dame 7, Ohio State 8, Tennessee 9, and then I believe Indiana will likely be 10. I believe SMU will be 11 and Clemson will be 12. I could see a flip-flop of that and having SMU at 11 and Clemson at 12. SMU at 12, Clemson at 11. I could see that because obviously Clemson just beat SMU on a neutral field. It's hard for me to understand how you could do that, though, when both teams were each in the ACC. One lost 3 games, one lost 1 game. And because SMU lost on a neutral field in a 1-game sample size to Clemson, I don't know how you possibly leapfrog SMU here. I think Clemson will be the 12 and SMU will be the 11. I don't think either team should jump Indiana. Not that I think Indiana's phenomenal by any means, but I don't see how you can't tell me that a 3-loss Clemson can jump a 1-loss Indiana team, especially when Clemson has 0 legitimate wins. In fact, before this win versus SMU, Clemson's only win over a team with a winning record was Pittsburgh, and they beat Pittsburgh by 3 in a comeback effort against a team Pittsburgh team playing with a backup quarterback. They got outgained in the game by 110 yards, and they very well should have lost the game. So to me, there's no way you can put Clemson over Indiana, and I think SMU has to drop below Indiana after losing today, even though I don't think that they should be penalized once again. So I believe SMU will be 11, Clemson will be 12. I think Indiana will be 10. What that sets up, though, and this is important, I'd like to mention this, is, Penn State and Texas lose today, right? Georgia and Oregon win their conference titles. Big, that's obviously a big deal to Kirby Smart and Georgia winning the SEC, Dan Lanning winning the Big Ten in his first year. It's a great accomplishment. But here's the problem with the playoff system. And there's a couple issues that I have with it. And number one is the fact, I guess it's kind of all together, and that's the fact that we don't reseed here. And when you look at the paths for these teams, obviously getting a bye is a beneficial thing. However, Texas and Penn State are the big winners today if this plays out the way I believe it will, where Texas gets the 5 and Penn State gets the 6. If you're wondering what I mean, more than likely, if you look how this is going to probably play out, you're going to have Ohio State and Tennessee at the 8 and the 9 seed. Okay, so that's 2 really, really solid football teams. The winner of that game is going to play Oregon on a neutral field. I'll tell you this, if Ohio State plays Oregon on a neutral field, Ohio State will be favored in that game. That's crazy. So you have an Oregon team who goes a perfect 13-0 and wins the Big Ten title, and because of how it plays out, they have to play Ohio State in the second round on a neutral field, right? Similarly, Georgia's going to be number 2. More than likely, I believe Notre Dame is going to be the 7. They're going to play Indiana and South Bend in that first game. more than likely Notre Dame's going to win that game. And now Georgia all of a sudden is playing Notre Dame in a neutral in the second game, or in their first game, right? In the quarterfinals. Now, if you look at Texas and Penn State's road, assuming they get the 5 and the 6, the road for the 5 and the 6 are significantly easier, right? Obviously, you play an additional game, but Texas is going to play either Clemson or SMU, and Penn State will play the other more than likely, and they'll both be close to double-digit favorites. Penn State wouldn't be a double-digit favorite against SMU, against Clemson or SMU, but Texas would. Texas will be a 9 or a 10-point favorite against SMU. They were a 6.5-point favorite, or opened that against Texas A&M on the road. They'll be probably 10 against Clemson and 9 and against SMU is my guess. Penn State will be 7, around 6 or 7 against those two. So my point being is you get a game where you're going to be a significant favorite at home, and then you look at the second round game. Who are they? Texas, assuming they're the 5, will get Arizona State on a neutral, where they will be a close to a touchdown favorite. Penn State will get Boise State on a neutral, where they will be close to a touchdown favorite. Once again, who has the easier road, assuming Penn State and Texas do not get upset in the first round in a home playoff game as a big favorite. If they are able to win that game, who has the easier road at that point forward? And that's actually my issue. This is coming from a Texas fan. Texas lost to Georgia, right? Texas should not, twice, at home in Austin and on neutral. Texas should not benefit from losing to Georgia in the sense that they get to play Arizona State in the second round, right? Where all of a sudden Notre Dame has to play, or Georgia has to play Notre Dame. Now, reseeding wouldn't necessarily fix that on its own, because technically Arizona State is a higher seed than Notre Dame, or a better seed, right? So how do you fix it? I think reseeding is part of it, but I also think they probably need to adjust how the seeding works. I like having conference champions get automatic bids. What I don't like is giving a conference champion an automatic bid and a bye. If you think about other college tournaments, like think about the college basketball tournament, right? You get an automatic bid if you win your conference, which is fair, right? You win your conference tournament, you are the conference champion, you get an automatic bid into the NCAA tournament. Are you guaranteed a specific spot, a specific seed, because you won your conference tournament? No, you're not, right? You can win your conference tournament if it's a shitty conference, and you can be the 16 seed and play in the play-in game, right? So what's weird is that we're allowing teams like Arizona State and Boise State, and all the credit to them for what they did this season. Awesome story, and I like both. I have a damn Ashton Jeanty jersey. I love Ashton Jeanty. I think he's the Heisman Trophy winner, even though they're going to probably give it to Travis Hunter. But point being, Boise State is never being seeded. If we're just seeding these based on the best teams, they're never being seeded in the top 4, nor is Arizona State, right? So I'm all for giving those teams like Arizona State and Boise State a spot. I just don't know how you seed them and give them a bye when they played a much easier schedule and a much easier conference and won their conference championship, excuse me, and get in. And then it really, in my opinion, that is what causes the issues in matchups where you get an Oregon having to play an Ohio State or a Tennessee, right? If you rank these teams, if you get your field and you say, okay, here are our 5 automatic bids from the conference champions, here are our 7 at-large bids, and now everybody is in, we're going to seed you based on your resume 1 to 12. The top 4 teams will get a bye. I don't like putting that much power in the committee's hands. They already have plenty of it. They don't need more, but it would fix that problem, right? Because, when you're looking at this, Ohio State's going to be the 8 seed, but they're going to be probably ranked 6th, right? Similarly, Texas is going to be the 5 seed, but in reality, they're probably going to stay at they're probably only going to drop 1 spot. They're probably going to be number 3. Same thing for Penn State. They're probably going to be number 4. So that's how I think that's fixable. And it's the first year, and we're learning, and everybody's trying to figure this thing out. And I like that we're moving in the direction of giving more teams shots. Now, I don't like that these conference title games are kind of meaningless. for teams who are already in, like Texas and Georgia today, or Oregon and Penn State. But I do think it's fun that all these teams have a vested interest. All these fan bases have a vested interest in watching these games and hoping they make the college football playoff. Let me know in the comment section what you think below. Does my seating make sense to you? Do you think that there's going to be differences? What is your seating? Do you think Texas and Penn State deserve the 5-6 after losing in their conference championships, or should they drop farther and Notre Dame, Ohio State, Tennessee, and those teams have a shot to jump them? Do you think that my projection on Bama being left out is correct, or do you guys think SMU is going to get left out? Hopefully, you guys are watching this in the morning, looking for some content, just trying to check this out. If you are, please give us a like and a subscribe. It really helps the channel out as we try to build up for some college football and NFL content and bringing you guys more and more of that every day. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys next time.